Hashem Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim Tezvav, Zevachim 15. The Daf is dedicated for Shmer for the Chayalim and Sol for the Shuyim. And the Yeshua for Am Yisrael on the Seis Tzara. We're going to start 2 lines from the bottom on 14b. The Gemara tells us, since we're discussing the question of the avoda that's called halacha, that you have to carry the blood towards the altar. But Rabbi Shimon had said, even though the position of the Tanna Kama was that this is a complete avoda, so if you have a disqualifying thought when you're doing it, it's going to disqualify the offering, and also can only be done by a kohen. Rabbi Shimon had said that this avoda, since it's possible to do the service without this avoda by doing the sacrifice right next to the altar, therefore, a thought during this process is not disqualifying. Now, in this context, the Gemara asks another question. The Gemara tells us, first of all, the position of Rabbi Yochanan. Itmar Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha shelo beregel, lo shma halacha. If you convey this blood without walking, that's not going to be considered conveying. And so therefore, if you have an improper thought there, it's not disqualifying because you didn't actually do anything. That's what Rashi says. And also, if a non-Kohen does it, it's not going to be considered an avoda. So halacha shel beregel lo shma halacha efshar. So now the Gemara says, okay, but efshar with tikuna, lo efshar. So let's say you did this halacha shelo beregel. Are you able to fix it or not fix it? So Rashi points out what the question here is. Whether a non-Kohen did it or whether a Kohen himself did it, and we had said that this is not halacha, and we required there to be an halacha, but since there was no regel, it wasn't considered halacha, there was no walking, we say it's not halacha, and therefore it's disqualified because it wasn't done properly. You need to have halacha. Nevertheless, we want to know, the basic question is, can we fix it? Can we go back to the place we need to go back to and walk it with our foot and convey it with our feet? Or is that not considered, or is it something that you can't fix? Efshar with tikuna or efshar with tikuna. The Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof. Tashmad. This was from the Mishnah that was cited yesterday. Kibel akashar v'nasam psul. So let's say the person who received the blood initially was kosher, and he gave it to somebody who was disqualified. Yachzir kosher. Then the disqualified person has to give it back to the kosher one who can convey it properly. Nihi nami diachzor. And even if, as we amended the text yesterday, and we explained that what does it mean? Diachzor akosher v'yikablenu. And like we amended the text yesterday, that really all it means is that he'll take the blood from the disqualified person who's standing far away. And doesn't mean he needs to go back to the first place, but nevertheless, if we said, if we say once the conveying was done improperly, it can't be fixed, if salala, and it's disqualified, then it should be disqualified at that point. So if you say it can't be fixed, it should be disqualified. So isn't this a proof that it can be fixed? Gemara says, no, misavris the kai zar gavai, or the kai zar barai. No, why do you had assumed incorrectly? You would have assumed that the non-Kohen was standing between the Kohen and the altar, and so therefore it had been moving the process forward. But it's possible that the non-Kohen had been standing in the opposite direction, away from the altar. So it hadn't done any of the halacha at all because it was going in the opposite direction, and so therefore that's the reason why it's not disqualified. So the Gemara says, Itmar Amar Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha shelo beregel psula. So Rabbi Yochanan taught that halacha that was done without feet, meaning to say you didn't convey it properly, it's disqualified. Alma lo efshar l'tikuna. We see from here that it cannot be fixed. Cannot be fixed. The word alma is unusual here. It's maybe not the proper text, but means. But Rashi says that this is what it means. The expression of psua means it's impossible to fix. It's impossible to fix at this point. The Shita Mikubetes has a little bit of a different approach. He says even if it's psua, it doesn't mean it can't be fixed. But nevertheless, we'll just go with Rashi here. Not just go with Rashi, we'll go with Rashi here because we're doing the Daf Yomi. And so in that interest, we'll stick with the Rashi approach. So Eisvei Rav Nachman U'ah. So Rav Nachman challenges U'ah's position that it can't be fixed because we say Nishbach min HaKliyah Ritzbah v'Asafo Kosher. That if we learned from the Mishnah Daf Hama Beis that if after you receive the blood from the neck of the animal, it fell into the utensil, and then it fell from the utensil onto the floor, and then it gathered it up. It's going to be kosher. So therefore, we're going to see from here that since it was received in the utensil, it's going to be kosher. And the Gemara's assumption is that when it falls down on the floor, it's spread in different directions. And part of it went towards the altar, and part of it went away from the altar. And still we say it's kosher. And so we see that you could pick it up and fix it. And so we see that you can fix it. Gemara says, no, Hachamay Eskinon, or Hashem, or on Tezvav Amadav, good morning. So the Gemara says, no, what are we talking about in that case? Kishayotzel Chutz, where the blood never went towards the altar, it didn't convey at all, it was going in the opposite direction. So the Gemara says, really, when you drop something and it splatters all over the place, we can really be certain that it only goes backwards in one direction. It didn't go towards the Mizbeach. Gemara says, yeah, because B'makom Madron, that the base of the Temple Mount was built on a slant, and so all the blood was flowing in that direction, it was just flowing away from the altar. All the blood fell into a ditch away from the altar, not towards the altar. Or else maybe we're talking about very thick blood. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah has to teach us this case just for this scenario where there was this ditch or it was very thick blood, and so therefore none of it went to it. Why would the Mishnah? It should be teaching us a general rule. Why would it be teaching us this very specific case? And then furthermore, like we say in the next chapter, which is again a highly unusual phrase, the Zevachim has some highly unusual phrases, and very rarely does the Gemara refer to the other chapter. That's an unusual phrase. We had something similar in Zevachim earlier where we said Bereish Pirkin. But anyway, like we said in the other chapter, Nishbach Ritzbah Asafo Pasal. When it gives the later case in the Mishnah, where it says that if the blood falls on the floor and it was gathered up, it's disqualified. Why would it give that case? It should have said, and there are the cases where it didn't fall into the utensil first, it fell straight onto the floor. It should have drawn the distinction in this case. When do we say that if the blood falls into the utensil and then falls on the ground, it is kosher when it went away from the altar? But if it went towards the altar, also would have been disqualified. That would have been a better distinction, a sharper distinction. Gemara says to you, it's a refutation. So the Gemara says, Itmar halacha shelo beregel machlokas Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. So we learned that halacha shelo beregel, this question of if you conveyed it without walking, that's actually a dispute between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan. So that Rabbi Shimon, remember we said, doesn't require halacha. So therefore, he says the disqualifying thought by halacha is an improper thought by halacha, since halacha is not necessarily always have to be the case, because you can do it right next to the altar. Therefore, an improper thought does not disqualify it. The Chachamim say it does. So now we're saying halacha shelo beregel. Also, if you do it without conveying it by foot, that Rabbi Shimon would say it's okay because you don't even need the halacha. Whereas the Rabbanan say it's going to be disqualified. So therefore, it's a machokas b'rishim of Rabbanan. The halacha Rabasi, if it will be a far walk, kuyamo apugi dipsula. Now everybody would say it's disqualifying. No, where is it a case where it's right next to the altar? And so that's how the rabbis in Bava want to understand that the Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan are only arguing when you have to walk far away to get to the altar. But if you're right next to the altar, then even the rabbis would say that it's okay. Excuse me, that Rabbi Shimon, that even Rabbi Shimon would agree by halacha robati that it's that it's not going to be okay if it's not beregel. But they only argue where it's right next to the altar. The Rabbanan say it's not okay if you don't take it with the foot, and the Rabban and Rabbi Shimon would say it's okay. But when they said this approach, they laughed at them in Eretz Yisrael, and they said they raised the question from a chatas ha'of. What's the chatas ha'of? This is a bird that was brought as a sin offering. Several cases where it can be brought as a carbon oil of the orate, where you bring a bird as a sin offering, and then what you do is you take the after the bird is killed by the Kohen through a process called malika, where he sticks his finger through the neck of the back of the neck. Then he throws the blood from the bird. He throws the blood towards the altar, and then he squeezes the bird against the altar, and more blood comes to the base of the altar. If that's the case, chatas of the psuaba. Rabbi Shimon, everybody's in a position that if when you're sprinkling the blood, you have an improper thought. But according to Rabbi Shimon, since it's right next to it, so therefore, how would you ever have such a case? Look at the Rashi. El Chatas Ha'of, Rashi says that we learn in Parakodshe Kodashim, the possible machshava ba'azas, Dama, so that if you have an improper thought, it's disqualified because it says the hiza midama chatas, you grab a hold of it and you throw its blood towards the wall. And this hataza, this throwing, is equivalent, Rashi says, to the halacha zutarti because it's right next to the altar. And so therefore, since the reason of Rabbi Shimon, since according to Rabbi Shimon, you're saying halacha zutarti lo patzaba, how, according to Rabbi Shimon, if this is the equivalent of the halacha zutarti, then how would he ever have this disqualification in this case? But we know improper thought is disqualifying it. So the Gemara's answer to that is, well, the first Gemara says, if he thinks improperly before the blood is thrown from the bird, and it's before the process. And if it was after the blood was thrown, it's avdei mitzvah, so he's already done his mitzvah. Gemara says, what kind of question is this? My kushya. I don't even understand the question, says the Gemara. No, there's this gap. Maybe the improper thought happened from the moment he threw it, and before it reached the altar. That was the improper thought. And we know that there is a time for something to get messed up there. Remember Rabbi Yirmi was thrown out of the base of Medrash because he asked about the chicken 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Well, he's asking another very precise question here. Rabbi Yirmi asked from Rabbi Zera, let's say he's throwing the blood from the bird. Basically, after he killed the bird, he throws the blood from the bird, v'nikta yado, and after he does it, his hand is chopped off. Shalmaza. Now we know if a Kohen without a hand is disqualified, so he was kosher when he threw it, but then after he threw it, his hand got severed. Before the blood actually reached the altar. What will be the case there? And so, meaning to say, there is this gap where something can happen. Rabbi Zera says it's disqualified. My time, that at the moment it gets over the altar, we need his hand to be intact. And so therefore, that's a space where it could be. So why were they even laughing in Eretz Yisrael? He says, I'll tell you why. When Rav Papa came, he said, this is why they were laughing. He said, you say that by halacha Rabasi, Rabbi Shimon would agree with the Chachamim that conveying it by foot is disqualifying. And that's where they're arguing. that's the case where they actually argue. But if it's halachas utarti, then everybody would agree. Even the chachamim would say it's not disqualifying. Everybody would agree that they're not disqualifying under those circumstances. But the Bach says just the opposite. Because we just said the case of the bird that everybody would say it is disqualifying. So we change it to no, that's the only case where they're arguing is where it's a long distance, and that's why they laughed at them in Eretz Yisrael. So now we have another question. Let's say the non-Kohen conveyed it, which is disqualifying, but the Kohen takes it back and brings it properly. So is that going to be enough to say he fixed it? Can he fix it? So Pugiba, B'nei Rabbi Chia, v'Rabbi Yanai. So the children of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yanai argue about this. Chadam or kosher, chadam or pasal. One says okay, one says not. Mar savar afshar with tikuno. Mar savar afshar with tikuno. One says you can fix it, the other says you can't. So the Gemara explains, Holicho Kohen, Mar savar afshar tikuno, afshar tikuno. Holicho Kohen v'chziro v'chazer v'holicho zar. But let's say you have a different case. The Kohen brought it, and then he brought it back, and then a non-Kohen brought it. So what would be the law there? The one who says in the first case it could be fixed. Well, in this case, because basically we're going by the last action. Well, in this case, he would say it's partial, disqualified, because the last one to do it was the non-Kohen. The different so according to the one who says it was disqualified in the first case, because once the action was done, it's done. You would say it's machshir. We don't care what happened after it was done. Rav Amar, no, Afal different apostle, even according to the one who says it was disqualified in the first case, it's still going to be possible in this case. My timer, because at the end of the day, that's Tzaracham Tuye. At the end of the day, he needs to get it to the altar, and so therefore it's still needed to bring it there. So on top of Tesvavam Beis, Amarle Rebbe Yirmiyah, but some say it's Ravina or Ravashi. It makes more sense to say Ravina to Ravashi because Ravina and Ravashi are the same generation. Rabbi Yirmiyah was much earlier. So it says Ravina to Ravashi, Hachi Amar Rav Yirmiyah midifti hatzarach lamtuye. So that this idea of whether or not you need to bring it, in that case, where since it needs to get there, is it disqualifying even though it's done right? Isn't this the machokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan that we had in our Mishnah? That the Tanan Rabbi Eliezer said, "I'm a halach, but makom shetzarach halach." Let's say that Rabbi Eliezer had a third position, which we haven't yet analyzed of our Mishnah, that the Chachamim say disqualifying thought of halacha is disqualifying. Rabbi Shimon says not, because you don't actually need a halacha always. And Rabbi Eliezer says, well, it depends if you're going in the place where you need to go. If you're walking where you need to go, then your machshava is posel, then it's disqualifying. But makom she'ein tzarach halach, a place where you don't need to, ein machshava posel, then it's not disqualifying. V'amar Rava, akol modim, everybody says, kiblo b'chutz, v'chniso b'fnim. If you received it out, kiblo b'chutz, here it means far away, at a distance from the altar. And you brought it closer to the altar, everybody would say under those circumstances, zeu hiluch shetzarach halech. That's something that's necessary, and it's disqualifying according to Rabbi Eliezer. Kiblu b'fnim v'otziu lechutz, zeu hiluch she'ein tzarach halech. And if you received it close and then you brought it backwards, that was something that you didn't need, so it wouldn't be disqualifying. And so therefore, they only argue about a case where they brought it in and then they brought it out. So one is of the position that since now the blood needs to be brought closer, therefore it's a disqualifying thought. Since you already brought it there the first time, we don't care that you need to bring it back. Not needed. And that's Rabbi Elazar's position. The Gemara says, Abaye challenges Rava that's the explanation of the Mishnah, because Rabbi Eliezer Omer that if you go where you need to go, your thought is disqualifying. Ketzad, and what's the example? Kibul b'chutz v'chnisu ufnim. So if he took it from faraway place to the place, that's something that's necessary. Kibul b'fnim v'otzil l'chutz. If you received it inside and you brought it outside, mean far away, that's unnecessary. But doesn't that imply that if you go and bring it back, that's hilchat. So your reading, Rava, your forced reading is incorrect. So Rava says, okay, you have a brisa, I back off. And Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan are not arguing about this case of can you fix it or not. Hadron al Zevachim, you had a question, Jeff? No, it doesn't matter. In this case, this is the brisa. It could be the Kohen, but the problem is if it's disqualifying thought happens at a part where it's unnecessary. What's unnecessary? So Rava tried to say once he had already brought it there, Rabbi Eliezer saying it's unnecessary to bring it back. I'm saying no, it still needs to be there. But if I rejected that because we have a brisa that says no, that anytime you need to get it to that place, that's going to be necessary. So I guess the question is, yeah. But that's not the case. Oh yeah, the first case was like that. If the Kohen brought it, then the non-Kohen tried to bring it. So then the question is, does that disqualify it? Yeah. So then Rava said that would be disqualified because it still needs to get there. It still needs to get there. Rava says it still needs to get there.
Once it's there, it's there.
That's a dispute. That was a machokes, but Rava tried to say it wasn't a machokes, and that's fine. But then we weren't able to connect it to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan. So now the Gemara says, "Hadron kol Zevachim," and then we start the next chapter. Kol Zevachim shekibu daman. So all the Zevachim where they receive the blood, but it's not just receiving the blood; it's any of the essential avodas, with the exception of shlita, meaning kabbalah, halacha, and zrika. If the person who received the blood was disqualified, if he was a zar, if he's a non-kohen or an onain, he's on the Rahman on the day of the levaya or tabul yom, he immersed in the mikvah, but he requires nightfall till he could do the avodah. Mechusar kippurim, he needs to bring a korban. He's one of the what's called the zav mitzvah and yoledes. They're mechusar kippurim, that they need to bring a korban in order to be able to complete their purification process. Mechusar begadim. He's not wearing all of the garments of the kohen, either the 4 garments of the regular kohen or the 8 garments of the kohen gadol. Shelo rachatz yadayim v'raglayim. He didn't do his proper sanctification of hands and legs before doing that avodah, or RL. Somebody who is not circumcised. Rashi says we don't care why he's not circumcised. Even if he had a good reason, a good excuse, he's disqualified from service in that temple. Rabbeinu Tam throughout Shas generally says that no, that RL refers to somebody who does not circumcise when he's required to. But if he has a excuse because he's dangerous, then it's okay. Tame, or somebody who's ritually impure, or Yoshev, or Omeid al Gavakilam, or somebody who's sitting when he does the service, or somebody his feet are not touching the ground, meaning he's wearing socks or shoes, well, that's disqualified. Or Al-Gabe Behemoth, is on an animal, Al-Gabe Ragel Chavay, or all these cases, so if he's standing on his friend's legs, he's possibly disqualified. Kibal Bismo, if he does it with his left hand, he's also disqualified. Possible. Rabbi Shimon Machshir. Rabbi Shimon says, no, if you do it with your left hand, it's not disqualifying. Zarmina. And so the Gemara says, how do we know that a non-Kohen is disqualified from doing the avodah? The Tani Levi, we're going to give several explanations, several sources. We'll just do the first one today. Tani Levi, Daber al Aaron ve'al banav v'yine'azru mikotshei b'nei Yisrael. So speak to Aaron and his children and separate from the Kodshei b'nei Yisrael. So they do not, meaning to say that they're not allowed to serve when they are tamei. So, but why does it say that they have to separate from the sacrifices of Bnei Yisrael? I mean, they have to sacrifice from everybody's offering. Mikacham, it should say. So, if you want to say that the intent is to separate from the sacrifices that women were allowed to bring, and means to say karban nashim and tuma karb, you mean that the karban of the women can be brought in a state of ritual impurity? You want to say that it's to exclude from the sacrifice that we bring for idolatry. The tzit, which generally speaking, the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol, generally speaking, is atones for the sins of the tuma of chelev and dam. It doesn't atone for the carbon of the idolatry. The Amar of the carbon so that if it's a carbon that's brought for idolatry, even if they were tummy accidentally, it doesn't serve as an atonement. But tuma karav, would you say that the kohanim could bring this carbon in a state of tuma? Ella hachikamar. So this is what the pasuk means. Binazru mikache, and it means that they speak to the children of Aaron, tell them to separate while they're in a state of tumah from the kachim, and also Bnei Yisrael, also Bnei Yisrael need to separate them. So that's the first source that we know that a non-Kohen cannot serve in the temple. Okay, we're going to go upstairs, Baruch Hashem, to do the slichos this morning. Shekoyach to everybody.